Evening. I am Dr. Kanupriya, Assistant Professor with the Department of English at Manav Rachna International Institute of Research and Studies. I welcome you all to the fifth day of 7-day International Faculty Development Program on creating and stimulating research-based teaching in higher education, jointly organized by the Department of English, Manav Rachna International Institute of Research and Studies, and Cape Comorin Trust. The speakers for today are Dr. Rania Lampour, Dr. Supapal Rawat, and Dr. Pradhan Mehboob Siraj. So the first speaker for the day is Dr. Rania Lampour. It's a very impressive and highly intellectual profile, so please listen very carefully because there is a lot to be offered by a ma'am and a lot on her plate. Dr. Rania Lampour is a global educator, STEM instructor, ICT trainer, neuroeducation researcher, international keynote speaker, author of scientific books for kids, and Global Peace Ambassador in Greece. She has a postgraduate degree in language teaching related to cognitive neurosciences, and she is also a passionate researcher on cognitive neurosciences, neuroeducation, and neuromarketing. Currently, she is a STEM instructor at the Greek Astronomy and Space Company, and she is also working at the Greek Ministry of Education at the Directorate of Education Technology and Innovation, where she writes STEM projects for Greek schools. She has been awarded many national and international prizes, over 130, and she is a Global Teacher Award 2020 and 2021 winner and a Global Teacher Prize finalist 2019. Recently, she has been selected as Global Icon 2020, featured in Passion Vista magazine among the top 10 women entrepreneurs, featured in Fortune, among the 100 most successful women in business, featured in an Amazon book by Global Trade Chamber, and among the top 10 CEOs of the year 2021-22. She features in the book The 28 Credentials of an Entrepreneur by Global Business and Investment Consulting Firm, in the book Queen's Book 2021, 100 Great Educators Who Have Inspired the World, 100 Inspirational Superwomen, and in the books 100 Eminent Academicians of 2021. She promotes STEM vision by introducing STEM in astronomy and physics projects and combines STEM with language teaching. She is the founder and international coordinator of many innovative international projects that focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals described in the 2030 Agenda. She is also an author of scientific books for kids. Furthermore, she is a social activist, a Global Peace Ambassador, senior advisor of United Nations Peacekeepers Federal Council. She is also a member of the Educational Committee of the Ecumenical Delphic Union in collaboration with Harvard University, and International Ambassador of Voluntarism and Education of the Greek Academy of Voluntarism, Hellas. She has received many humanitarian and peace awards from international humanitarian organizations. She is an editorial board member of many journals. She has presented her research in numerous international conferences and e-conferences, and she has published works in various journals. I welcome you all, ma'am. I welcome you here, and we are seriously looking forward for the intellectual which you will be sharing with all of us. I would like to inform all of you that today, Dr. Lampour will be talking about unleashing the potential of brain-based teaching, which is very interesting for all of us. Of course, we'll be very enlightened. Over to you, ma'am.
Warm greetings from Greece. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
It's a great pleasure and honor to be invited today in this enriching and resourceful international faculty program, and I warmly thank Manav Rachna Institute for this kind invitation. And today we will explore the fascinating world of neuroeducation and brain-based teaching, where we see how we can apply effective teaching strategies and techniques based on principles of cognitive neurosciences in order to make learning and teaching more challenging and more effective. So may I share now my presentation? Is it possible to see now? Can you see now my presentation?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Can you see also the change of slides?
Yes.
Okay. So we're talking a lot today about 21st century skills. We all know about critical thinking, creative thinking, problem-solving capabilities, communication, leadership, etc. So how these 21st century skills are actually related to cognitive neuroscience and neuroeducation? Neuroscience is undoubtedly the most active scientific field of the moment. I think its specialists now have tools of incredible precision at their disposal, and they're more willing than ever to strive to uncover the most intimate mechanism of our consciousness. And this field focuses on the scientific study on the nervous system, analyzing both its structure and its way of functioning. And it belongs to the larger family of cognitive sciences, which were first introduced in the decade of 50s. So this term was used in association with five founding disciplines: computer science, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, linguistics, anthropology. Soon, however, more disciplines were associated with it. And the cognitive sciences have experienced a great rise of a meteoric rise, which has also been described as a scientific revolution. Nowadays, form a very broad disciplinary field where very diverse approaches coexist. So from the 80s onwards, the constant rise in popularity and interest in the field of neuroscience made the pivot of cognitive sciences. In 2085, a psychologist, Howard Gardner, published the first history of cognitive revolution with the subtitle A New Science of the Mind. And the decade of 90s were called the decade of the brain, and a lot of new models were developed, the symbolic model, connectionism, etc. So today we could say that there is no dominant model. The development and rise of new brain imaging techniques advanced the study of brain activity considerably. So neuroscience is today at the crossroads of biological, chemical, medical, computer, mathematical, and psychological sciences. And in France, we have Jean-Pierre Sanger, is the one who promotes neuroscience in the public space, is considered as a representative of the cultivation of biology for 40 years. And his two books, The Neural Man and The Man of Truth, have made history in the field of neuroscience. So according to Sanger, neuroscience will bring us a new vision, a new conception of man and humanity. Neuroscience inaugurates the lights of the 21st century. And of course, the goal of neuroscience is not just to map the brain, but and spot the biological processes involved in cognition, what we call the act of knowing. But we use the term cognitive neuroscience to indicate the ultimate aim and approach to understand mental operations and to identify the links between structures and functions. For a long time, we know that cognitive sciences were centered only on the study of cognitive phenomena. However, recently it's emotions also which have been at the forefront of studies in this field. We have the works of Antonio Damasio, Joseph Ledoux, and many others who help popularize the idea that higher intellectual functions are closely connected with emotions. So we talk about exploration of the study of emotion because after those years of neglect by both mainstream biology and psychology, the study of emotions has emerged as a central topic of scientific inquiry in this vibrant new discipline of neuroscience. So there are fundamental questions. So what is the function of emotion? What is the role of the body in emotions? What are feelings and how do they relate to emotions? Why emotions are so difficult to control? Is there any emotional brain? So we talk about the science of emotion. Why? Because emotion has a substantial influence on the cognitive processes, including perception, attention, learning, memory, reasoning, and problem solving. And of course, it has a particular strong influence on attention and motivation, motivating this way action and behavior. We're going to explore all this later. Cognitive neuroscience, of course, is based on the fact that the nervous system is where the main learning tool is being developed. That means that learning takes place in the brain, and Another concept which is very, very interesting to see is brain plasticity, the spectacular capacity of the brain to reconfigure itself from a functional point of view in response to stimuli from the environment. And in recent years, neuroscience has become, as I said before, a major pole of attraction for several disciplines, and education is no exception. So a report was published by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development in 2007, titled Understanding the Brain, the Birth of a Learning Science, was greatly contributed to the development of neuroeducation. The field of research is called educational neuroscience, covers multiple disciplines, including neuroscience, cognitive science, and education. So according to this, learning is something that is a process that takes place in the brain. Learning is a metamorphosis of existing cognitive structures or the creation of new cognitive structures. And today, thanks to sophisticated brain imaging devices, it's possible to study the changes in the brain caused by student learning. So it's actually a new research approach. A new research approach. What is neuroeducation or neuropedagogy? It's a new research approach that attempts to bring together knowledge in neuroscience and education, especially through brain imaging techniques, and it aims to highlight certain educational problems in order to allow the possibility to propose new solutions. So neuroeducation, it's important. Why? Because it makes it possible to better understand the nature of the cognitive work carried out by the learning during the performance of certain tasks. It helps us discover the effects of different types of education in the brain, to measure the effectiveness of an educational intervention and more quickly identify students who learn difficulties. That's why neuroeducation is closely related with special education, because it has helped a lot, teachers and experts about how to handle challenges and difficulties in special education, the special education field. So now, what are the principles of brain-compatible learning? First of all, it's brain unique because we are all different and unique. We all have the same set of systems, but these systems are integrated differently within its brain, and this makes us all different. This diversity is the result of our genetic heritage and different experience and environment. And learning changes the human brain. It means that while learning, two types of changes occur in the brain. It changes the internal structure of neurons and an increase in the number of synapses. Synapses means that there are more dendrites between neurons. So by changing a stimulus, a behavior, practical or mental exercise that would be, the brain changes respectively. And brain is also modified by experience. Multiple, complex, and concrete experiences are important for the growth of dendrites and healthy functioning of the brain. Our brain is programmed to learn because this need to learn appears to be a physiological need of the brain. This shows that we are genetically programmed to explore, discover, reflect, and learn. Learning is developmental. This is what I said before about neuroplasticity, because the brain is an organ with extraordinary adaptability and plasticity. Neurons are not fixed, are not immutable entities. The brain constantly restructures and maintains its plasticity throughout its life. And the other life is what we call pliable. The brain is a multifunctional parallel processor. That means that brain processes all information at the same time, simultaneously and continuously. Thoughts, emotions, imagination work simultaneously and interact with other processes of the brain. And our brain needs choices because the dynamics of the brain presuppose its capacity for free choice and decision making. The brain is not preformed, but structured in order to learn what it needs to learn when it's presented with the possibility of choice. That's why teachers should allow everyone to update the choice potential. And a brain searches for order organization because a brain seeks to bring order to chaos. Organization, including selection, ranking, and comparison, is a biological necessity for our brain. That's why mind maps and this kind of tools in the classroom are very important, because they try to put order and order into chaos. The human brain works both linearly by association, because the brain does not organize our thinking in a linear fashion, but globally and at the same time by association. By association, why? Because it compares, integrates, and relates, and seeks to give meaning to what it perceives. So association plays a key role in almost all our mental functions. Each word and idea has many links to other words and ideas and concepts, and the more associations you create in the brain, the more likely it is that the information will be encoded in long-term memory, and therefore it will be available for recall. And very, very important is that learning also presupposes connections with existing and prior knowledge. So dendrites, imagine that dendrites resemble the branches of a tree, and they develop from the branch that already exist. Therefore, when we learn a new concept or a new skill, the learner must first establish a connection with prior knowledge or experience. And the brain is for novelty. Why? Because when we learn new information, either new neural connections are made or the old ones are strengthened. So the brain learns when it enriches, adapts, and assimilates the unpredictable and the new. And we learn what we practice. It means that we learn because when we practice, new fibers, new dendrites grow and connect with each other and form synapses. Practice means making, of course, and correcting mistakes, learning from our own mistakes and trying constantly. So mistakes are a natural and necessary part of the learning process. Dendrites develop for what is being practiced. Very important role of attention. Attention, according to experts, our brain stays alert for only about 10 minutes. So in general, the dropout in a class occurs before the quarter of an hour of an activity. So the challenge here is to find a way how to maintain, develop our students' attention during a given time. A teacher can capture the attention of learners through a multitude of visual, of auditory, kinesthetic inputs, new and emotional experiences and alternations. And learning involves always conscious and unconscious processes because the brain absorbs information of which it is directly aware with concentrated attention, but at the same time it absorbs information which is beyond the immediate objective of attention. And our brain seeks pleasure, the pleasure center of the brain, or what we call the reward circuit, tends to desire the repetition of the stimulus or experience that causes pleasure. So every pleasant piece of information can cause the release of what we call the dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that causes feelings of euphoria in the brain with the production of endorphins and activates the limbic system, which is the center of emotions. And this way, learning becomes more enjoyable and positively reinforced when inner motivation, interest, and active engagement prevail. Learning learns best through a multisensory process because the brain needs multisensory experiences that involve all the senses in multiple treatments. Multisensory stimuli promote the development of the entire cortex, not only just one region. That's why we need multisensory activities. And repetition builds the brain because current neurology has shown that the creation of synaptic connections depends in part on the repetition of stimuli. Repeated experiences create neural connections that lead actually to learning. And the brain is social. Why? Because our brain evolves and learns through interaction and experiences with others. Learning is influenced in particular by the nature of our social relationships. Our brain seems to like learning from others. Natural development alone is not enough. Brain problem solving. Why problem solving? We have seen that problem solving is one of the most important skills in 21st century, and also one of the most important skills in STEM education. STEM education is nowadays most dominant model of methodology worldwide. So why problem solve? Because a brain is engaged in finding multiple responses to a problem rather than finding the right answer. So due to this process, which involves reasoning, critical thinking, and other high-level cognitive skills, neural growth takes place. So the teacher should create a challenging and relevant learning environment, reaching problem-solving activities and situations where students can build their own understanding of the content, organizing, and think with the aid of their own cognitive models. Learning and processing information takes time because we need the time to learn, because we need time to grow and connect to dendrites. And dendrites and synapses perhaps will start to disappear if they are not used or practiced. Those that are not used or have never been widely used are eliminated for reasons of economy. It's the famous quote of neuroscientists who say that if you don't use it, you will lose it. And in addition, learners have optimal, remember this, that learners have optimal learning times during the day. In general, learners tend to receive the most information towards the start of the course, so our introduction should be very strong, and then they experience a downtime when retention decreases. Therefore, teachers have to organize varied lessons, make their lessons shorter, and use many different teachings and means and aids. So the brain needs structural breaks. That means that we need the need to provide the structural breaks to create an alternation between taking information and moments of interiorization, inner silence, evocation, reactivation. Why? Because the human brain, of course, cannot absorb, cannot record an infinite amount of explicit information. Our brain needs breaks in order to internalize the information and replenish neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are those chemicals and transmitting pulses from neuron to neuron. So if the neurotransmitters are not renewed, what we call amygdala is the place in the limbic system that it's is a center of emotion, as I said before, the limbic system, and amygdala will block information and the memory efficiency will decrease. And at the same time, hippocampus is a place, the region in the brain, which is responsible for the memory, becomes overloaded, so no learning can take place. The search for meaning is innate relevance of information. That means that the search for meaning is a goal. It is oriented towards survival. It's essential for our brain. So very important that new learning is less likely to be rejected if it's straightforward and if it has relevance or value. New information is more likely to be acquired and remembered if it is meaningful and relevant. So learner-centered learning should therefore be effective and meaningful. It must take into account the experiential knowledge and the personal history of learners. Because meaningful learning involves the construction and reconstruction of meaning through our experiences. And patternization, why? Because this refers to organization, categorization of meaningful information. The brain naturally organizes information into categories, and this process is called the patternization. And this actually proves or illustrates the economics of the brain in the creation of mechanisms. It is a system that groups similar events into categories and hierarchies. And education means increasing the patterns that students can use, recognize, and communicate. So patternization allows us to organize and connect new learning with what we already know. It includes semantic maps, mind maps, diagrams, categories, models, etc. This is the limbic system that I mentioned before. We have hypothalamus, thalamus, amygdala. Said before, the center of amygdala is about emotions, and it's related to fear also. Hippocampus and learning pyramid. Here is the learning pyramid. Learning pyramid is founded on the results of research on memorization, and it was conducted by the National Training Laboratories in USA. And this shows that after 2 weeks, we tend to retain 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 50% of what we see, 70% of what we see or hear, and 90% of what we say and do. So this learning pyramid clearly illustrates that active participation in the learning process results in increasing knowledge building and retention. And of course, learning is a holistic process because learning is must be understood as a process of holistic adaptation. Each hemisphere of the brain processes information according to its specialty. This is a phenomenon known as lateralization of the brain, and then transmits its decision to the other hemisphere. In addition, each hemisphere is connected to the opposite part of the body. However, very important to clarify here something, that specialization of the two hemispheres of the brain in no way means separation, because the two brains at the same time collaborate. The two hemispheres have complementary functions, they cooperate and they interact. Usually there are, there is a theory of Howard Gardner, multiple intelligence Gardner, which says that the left hemisphere is associated with language skills, arithmetic, logic, presentation of facts, and the right hemisphere concerns the tuition, emotion, creativity. According to the recent data, according to recent findings of neuroeducation, this is not true. We can't talk about right or left hemisphere. Actually, there is a constant interaction and a collaboration of neurons between the two hemispheres in all our processes. So it's too simplistic and it's too overgeneralized to say that the left hemisphere of the brain is only responsible for logic, and the right hemisphere is only responsible for creativity. Actually, the both hemispheres must be taken into account when we plan learning activities for students, and we must solicit both hemispheres at the same time. Emotion and learning, the role of emotion actually is that could be, it's a huge chapter. We could talk for hours about this. Why it's important? Because everything we learn and organized by emotions is influenced and organized by emotions, states of mind. Feelings and thoughts shape each other, they cannot be separated. All the new scientific research suggests that new information that arouses pleasure is more easily stored in long-term memory. So the flow of information is usually inhibited by fear and weaknesses, while positive emotions can affect and reinforce certain types of learning. A brain responds to positive suggestions. Means the students both experience positive and negative emotions when they discover new knowledge for the first time. So teachers should promote positive experiences and emotions for the students, because negative emotions can lead to a feeling of demotion, of regression that reduces students' ability to learn at an optimum level. So a positive learning environment is important. Teachers should start teaching enthusiastically, make sure everyone in the class feels comfortable, that everyone understands. Such teaching suggests that we care about the learning of each learner separately, and each positive suggestion that could be also a non-verbal communication sends a message to the learner's brain. Environment and learning, because when the brain learns, it reacts and adapts to the environment changes. Learning a new element allows him to transform its neural networks in order to assimilate. And through this process, the brain creates new neural connections throughout life. The creation of an environment enriched by new learning experiences and challenges, as well as a stable sensory environment essential for brain growth. So what are the education implications of all these principles? First of all, these principles could help students to orient themselves towards higher cognitive functions when the students are provided with learning opportunities, especially through meaningful, as I said before, authentic activities. Our brain will delete everything that is not pleasant, everything that is not interesting, everything that's not challenging. The brain will delete it immediately. So we need challenging authentic activities with formative assessments, with corrective feedback. Feedback is also very important for the brain, because this way information could be consolidated in long-term memory. If we take into account the function of the brain, we can discover the state of our students. We can better identify their needs. They can define precise learning objectives for each and dynamically adapt teaching there. So teachers who know the principles of brain functioning seek to maintain the attention of students through multisensory experiences, awaken the senses and emotions. This way provide the multisensory representations in order to promote brain growth. So at the start of the teaching, teacher embraces the power of novelty, destabilizes the student, and associates new ideas with what the students already know, making connections between current knowledge and new material and checking previously acquired cognitive material. So we offer the possibility of choice always and promote the development of a wider range of mental, aesthetic, social, and emotional interests, skills, and competencies, use a wide variety of methods and supports, organizes as before, maps or games, role-playing, challenging, and improves memorization also. Knowing also the importance of repetition and respecting the laws of memorization, we should regularly review and repeat new knowledge using elaborate repetition by making structuring breaks of 5 to 10 minutes. Teachers involve all students should involve the students in learning process, from active learning to arrive at learning. They should respect individuality of each student and always opt for differentiation to respond to diversity and promote equity. Because fostering equity means allowing everyone to succeed. So we try to inspire increasing motivation, offer frequent opportunities for creativity, development, and provide enriched environments in order to develop critical and creative spirit. Promote higher order thinking, aim at deep learning and cultivate high-level intellectual skills, favor complex activities instead of difficult activities, prioritize questions instead of answers, and provide specific immediate feedback. Break boredom with novelty and pleasure and create a space to see, to hear, to speak, and reflect. Of course, the transfer, very important, the transfer of theoretical concepts to professional reality. Because, for instance, adults essentially learn when they feel the need and must be able to clearly perceive the usefulness of the proposed work. So students must be able to see the usefulness of what they're doing. They learn to learn by experience, independently, collaboratively. Teachers should involve students in real-life learning, connect complex real-world projects to students' personal interests, use inquiry and problem-solving learning, and create a pleasant atmosphere that promotes exploration, the pleasure of learning, eliminate a sense of threat, pressure, and stress, and develop a climate of high degree of pleasure. Another issue is that we don't have time to analyze this today, but it's interesting to see how these principles of new education are actually related to principles of design of these mediated devices that we use and all the apps that we use in classroom in educational technology. For instance, nonlinearity or hyperdocument. This is something that follows the brain and mediated interactive learning environments or systems in which the main elements are interrelated and interdependent. So hypertext, for instance, must allow the learner to connect ideas in a richer way that better conforms to the associative functioning of the human mind. So this principle of nonlinearity, the basic principle of multimedia, resembles the structure of the brain, resembles its networks and sections, as well as the learning process, since the learner is constantly confronted with periods during which an explosion of knowledge takes place and recomposition phases. Sensory immersion, multimodality, of course, we're talking about multimedia, referentiality, flexibility, variety, respectful learning styles, because the use of multimedia should make it possible to respect the profiles of learning styles and active participation in learning, of course. Innovation, we all know also how web use shapes our brain, and also, for instance, heavy use of the brain changes our brain. More experienced internet users activate more areas of the brain. Studies show that increasing exposure to images, for example, via television or computer screens, would increase our ability to orient ourselves in space. Or children who have grown up with a computer think very difficult from adults. And why? Because the reasoning seems to work in the same way as clicks on hypertext link, because the brain works like they jump from idea to idea, and their cognitive structures work in parallel rather than in sequentially. And we all know about the video games. Of course, there are many negative aspects, but the latest studies also show that video games help develop certain areas of the brain that are essential for everything from motor skills to orientation within space, memory development, strategic planning. So during the COVID pandemic, I wrote an article in National Magazine and also in a paper research paper where it's actually a guide to educators about how to cope with the challenges of the COVID pandemic using the techniques of brain-based teaching, brain-based learning. According to this, first of all, we need to create positive emotions. Why? As I said before, our brain is social. Our brain needs others to interact. And we have seen how COVID pandemic took a toll, emotional toll on children. It is crucial to create positive emotion, and this suggestion has a universal significance. It is not only restricted to coronavirus pandemic, but it has a universal significance. Make learning pleasant. Learning is reinforced by challenge and inhibited by threat. Challenging activities could increase attention to memorization. Human brain learns optimally when it is intrinsically motivated. Intrinsic motivation also is necessary for student creativity. And the difficulties that in this way, students will be mobilized and higher goals could be achieved and unexpected. Develop social skills. It's important also to help students express themselves and their feelings and their experiences about the COVID pandemic. This has a liberating and cathartic role, and the role of art also is important. The role of art in neuroeducation is important. That's why during the COVID pandemic, we have seen how many competitions were organized on the topic of the COVID pandemic. Why? Because art have this liberating role, cathartic role, and develop social skills said before, develop social skills said before. We talked about social distancing, for instance, during the COVID pandemic, but social distancing is only physical. It shouldn't lead to isolation. So this way, we could use, for instance, when we have online learning, we have to deal with online learning, online teaching. We can leverage collaborative platforms. We can leverage, we have bulletin boards, we have chats, forums, anything that can foster interaction and communication. We can still organize collaborative projects even during online learning. This is very important. Develop self-awareness, as I said before, help our students express themselves during the COVID pandemic, and also adopt appropriate methodology. What is appropriate methodology is always what fits best to your students, to their needs, to their rhythm, to their interests. So what would be an ideal lesson plan? First of all, we have seen so far the part of introduction, the preparation. So starting to teach a new learning object, the teacher will need to capture the attention of the students. So the best ways to do that, to learn, is novelty, humor, and surprise. Because our brain is always looking for something new, it is constantly looking for stimuli. And there is a system in the lower brain, which is known as the reticular activation system, filters out stimuli and decides what to pay attention to and what to ignore. And you know that there are neurons of novelty specialized in new impressions. And these neurons, they cause a state of vigilance and distract attention. Therefore, the need for the teacher to vary the stimulants and not always use the same, for instance, image, the same sounds, very important. So introduction is the most important factor in enhancing learning. The first time students are exposed to the given flow of information plays a very important role in their ability to retrieve information efficiently later. Staying focused is what I said before, depends on relevance and meaning. That's why teachers have to be careful with the relevant stimuli. The brain continually tries to understand the world and define if the information it receives is relevant. So, for instance, we can suggest a problem or a challenge related to sense of the student's life. And it's also use past experience in order to connect, as I said before, the information to prior experience, to create an experience with them. The second After that, we can talk about the acquisition and the acquisition of knowledge, the elaboration of knowledge. The acquisition of new knowledge requires a significant investment in terms of efforts and experience. Acting on the processing of information by the learner means making the learner aware of his own resources, of the strategies he employs, and above all, the operating conditions which the student themselves involve in the brain. Usually, the brain explores the subject by a variety of explicit that could be reading, listening, the discussion, homework, and implicit methods, for instance, role play, life experiences, simulations, and outings. The error itself, like I said before, is considered as a bad connection. On the other hand, learning from mistakes offers the opportunity to weaken bad connections in favor of more appropriate connections. So it is therefore essential to understand the reasons which led to an error at the risk of reproducing it. And these wrong connections have to be understood as soon as possible. Otherwise, they will only get stronger and more difficult to erase. Conceptions and prejudices are the fruit of erroneous connections which have not been erased. Information processing and learning are time-consuming. This is why progress must be made at a slow pace with breaks and pauses, why a variety of time-consuming activities such as having the students rephrase, explain and discuss the new information with each other, or the teacher writing curious diagrams on the board should be used. And during the downtime, which allows, it is the time which allows the brain to process new information, teachers can offer review activities such as games or lab activities, which allow students to practice what they have learned already. The part of the memory now. Remember that memory is a huge, actually, chapter. We can organize one webinar only for this. Many new inputs are kept in the frontal lobe for short-term memory, which stores information usually for 5 to 20 minutes. Many of these inputs are filtered and then discarded without being remembered. Even, as I said before, they are not deemed to be important if they are not meaningful, if they are considered as trivial. If, on the contrary, the inputs are considered relevant, they are routed to the hippocampus, so the region of the brain, and they are maintained there. So if learning material is considered important, it is organized, is indexed by the hippocampus, it is stored in the cortex. The relay station where information is processed before it is stored is known as the hippocampus. Hippocampus is a small crescent-shaped structure which learns quickly but has limited memory capacity. And this hippocampus organizes sorts of processes and incoming information before sending it to the different areas of the cortex for long-term memorization. So the more associations are created in the brain, the more likely is it that information will be encoded in the long-term memory, and therefore it will be available for recall. When information is stored in the long-term memory, something quite surprising happens. We have new synaptic connections that appear. So the long-term effect of learning is therefore the stabilization of the memory by the growth of new synaptic contacts in the brain. Remember something. Neuroscience say that learners best memorize information presented at the start. The information memorized second is that which is presented at the end of the lesson. And learners rarely memorize the information presented in the middle. So we need to pay attention to introduction and the conclusion. New information should be therefore presented during these times. Neuroscientists also say that the majority of learnings, that students usually forget 90% of what they have learned in class in 30 days. And they show that the majority of this forgetting occurs in the first hours after class. Which has been confirmed also by new studies. So the neural pathway initially used to process new information can become a permanent route if the brain reuses stored information. This is why repetition is something that reinforces memory. So information requires substantial repetition by students if they want to be able to recover it. And there are several ways to improve memory. These include mental development, the quality and quantity of associations created in the brain, prior learning and motivation, repetition and revision, emotional intensity. Memorization is also facilitated by the use of what we said before, heuristic diagrams, which will facilitate recall via the pre-existing connections between new and old information, and by reactivating information at favorable times in order to send it to be inscribed in long-term memory. So ways, of course, there are many ways about memory. Memory, as I said before, is a huge chapter. Also, remember that learning involves much more than just the communication between neurons in a predictable sequence. It's much more than that. It requires neurons to activate together, often enough to create relationships so that information can be recalled and applied in different situations. Building a relationship with what the students already know and engaging emotions can help promote long-term learning, and frequent review also helps to ensure retention and recall. Why? Because repetition is a biological effect which involves the following stages: solidity of connections, myelination, acceleration of information flows, solidity of synaptic patterns, integration of processes in procedural memory. New connections between a neural network can be established or strengthened, but also they can weaken and disappear. And the disappearance of connection is called synaptic pruning. Is what I said before, the code of neuroscientists, that if you don't use it, you will lose it. And the brain deteriorates only when it is not being used. During school activities, for instance, or academic activities, students should be directed towards the upper regions of the brain, because higher-order thinking increases understanding and retention. Brain imaging, imagery shows that elaborate repetition involving higher-order cognitive abilities involves usually the frontal lobe of the brain, and this helps learners to make connections between new and old learning, to create new pathways, to strengthen existing pathways, and to increase the possibility of consolidation and storage for future recovery. And according to neuroscientists also, the four pillars that cognitive neuroscience has identified as the four pillars that have been considered as important for the speed and ease of learning are attention, that serves to select information and massively modulates the activity; active engagement; feedback immediate during the action progress and close in time to the error; and the automation of knowledge and procedures, the transfer also from the explicit to the implicit, which involves repetition and teaching. And of course, what I said at the beginning, that the role of emotion is important, and that's why now all new research is related to this. So we talk about new signs of emotion. Here, as I said before, Hart Gardner is a case of multiple intelligence theory. But I said before, and I want to insist on this, that it's a very simplistic theory, which is very controversial, and according to new findings, so we can't talk about left to right hemisphere. Actually, there is a constant interaction between them. So thanks a lot for your attention, and for any question, I'm here to discuss with you.